Listen closely, because what I'm about to reveal will explain why your childhood pain wasn't a curse, it was your greatest advantage. While other boys were playing games and seeking constant validation, you were sitting alone, learning something most men never discover: how to be complete without anyone's approval. That loneliness you felt, it wasn't weakness. It was the universe preparing you for something extraordinary. You see, true Sigma males aren't born in the spotlight. They're forged in the shadows of solitude, in those quiet moments when a young boy realizes that the world won't save him, so he learns to save himself. And if you're watching this, you already know that feeling, that deep, unexplainable sense that you were always meant to walk a different path. Before we dive deep into this transformative journey, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is your brotherhood, your arsenal of truth in a world full of fake gurus and shallow advice. We don't follow trends, we create our own reality, and you need to be part of this movement. 1. The lonely child who learned to stand alone. There's a specific moment in every Sigma male's childhood that changes everything. It's not dramatic, it's not obvious, but it's the moment when you realize that no one is coming to rescue you. Maybe you were 7 years old, sitting in the corner of the playground while other kids formed their little groups. Maybe you were 10, eating lunch alone while everyone else had their tables full of friends. Or maybe you were 12, coming home to an empty house, learning to cook your own meals because your parents were always working. Whatever your specific moment was, you felt it, that quiet awakening that whispered, "You're on your own, kid." And here's what most people don't understand. That moment didn't break you, it built you. While other children were learning to depend on crowds for their sense of belonging, you were developing something far more valuable: self-sufficiency. You learned to solve your own problems. You learned to entertain yourself. You learned that your own company wasn't just tolerable, it was actually preferable to the drama and noise of unnecessary social circles. Let me give you a practical example. Think about the average adult male today. He can't spend 2 hours alone without checking his phone 50 times, seeking validation through likes and comments. He needs constant external stimulation because he never learned to be comfortable with himself. But you learned that skill at age 8. You were forced to develop an inner world so rich, so complete, that you didn't need anyone else to make you feel whole. This is the first Sigma advantage: radical self-reliance. You don't fear abandonment because you've already been abandoned, and you survived. You don't fear rejection because you've already been rejected, and you thrived. The lonely child became the independent man, and that's a transformation most people never achieve. 2. When silence became your greatest teacher. Most men spend their entire lives running from silence. They fill every moment with noise, music, television, social media, meaningless conversations, anything to avoid being alone with their thoughts. But you learned something different. You learned that silence isn't empty, it's full. In those long, quiet hours of your childhood, something remarkable happened. While other kids were absorbing the opinions, beliefs, and limitations of their peer groups, you were developing your own mind. You were thinking deeply. You were observing patterns. You were learning to listen to that inner voice that most people never even discover exists. Think about this. Every great philosopher, every strategic mind, every revolutionary leader in history had one thing in common. They spent significant time in solitude. Buddha sat under a tree. Jesus went into the desert. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations alone. Nikola Tesla worked in isolation. They understood what you learned as a child. Silence is where truth lives. Here's a practical example from modern life. Put a Sigma male and an alpha male in separate rooms with no phones, no entertainment, just themselves for 6 hours. The alpha will be climbing the walls after 30 minutes, desperately needing external validation and stimulation. The Sigma He's in his element. He's thinking, strategizing, visualizing, planning. He's using that time to sharpen his mind while others are dulling theirs with distractions. Your childhood silence taught you to be an observer, not a performer. You learned to watch how people really behave when they think no one's paying attention. You notice the patterns in human behavior that others miss because they're too busy participating in the chaos. You became a student of reality, not a consumer of illusions. And here's the key insight. Silence is where you learn to trust yourself. Without the constant noise of other people's opinions drowning out your intuition, you developed something rare, an unshakable inner compass. When everyone else is looking outward for answers, you look inward. That's not loneliness, that's mastery. 3. The emotional armor forged in isolation. Let's talk about something painful but powerful: emotional resilience. And I'm not talking about the fake toxic masculinity version where you pretend nothing hurts. I'm talking about real resilience, the kind that allows you to feel everything but be controlled by nothing. Your childhood isolation was like being thrown into an emotional forge. Every rejection, every moment of being excluded, every time you had to process difficult feelings alone. It was like hammer strikes on heated metal, shaping you into something unbreakable. Here's what happened that you probably didn't realize at the time. You learned emotional independence. Most men are emotional hostages. Their entire mood depends on external validation. Someone praises them, they're happy. Someone criticizes them, they're devastated. Someone ignores them, they spiral into anxiety. They're puppets and other people are pulling the strings. But you learned to process emotions internally. When you felt sad, you couldn't run to a crowd for comfort, so you learned to comfort yourself. When you felt angry, you couldn't lash out at friends who weren't there, so you learned to channel that energy productively. When you felt fear, you couldn't hide behind a group, so you learned to face it directly. Let me give you a practical example. Watch what happens when a Sigma male and a typical guy both get rejected by a woman. The typical guy immediately calls 5 friends, posts cryptic messages on social media, needs constant reassurance that he's still valuable. His whole week is ruined. The Sigma male, he feels the rejection, he's human, but then he processes it, learns from it, and moves on. By the next day, he's already focused on his goals again. Why? Because his emotional stability doesn't depend on external approval. This armor you built isn't about not feeling. It's about not being destroyed by feelings. You developed what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to experience negative emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Most men never develop this because they always had emotional crutches. You didn't have that luxury, so you built something better: emotional sovereignty. 4. Strategic solitude versus toxic loneliness. Now here's where we need to make a critical distinction, because not all loneliness creates Sigma males. There's a difference between strategic solitude and toxic loneliness, and understanding this difference is what separates the awakened Sigma from the broken hermit. Toxic loneliness is isolation that happens to you. It's passive, it's victimhood, it's the person who sits alone and blames the world, who becomes bitter, resentful, who uses their isolation as an excuse to stop growing. Toxic loneliness shrinks you. It makes you fearful, paranoid, and disconnected from reality. Strategic solitude is isolation that you control. It's active, it's intentional. It's the person who recognizes that time alone is valuable and uses it to build something. Their skills, their knowledge, their business, their character. Strategic solitude expands you. It makes you stronger, wiser, and more aligned with your purpose. Here's the key. True Sigma males transformed their childhood loneliness from something toxic into something strategic. You didn't just suffer in isolation, you weaponized it. You turned pain into power. Let me show you the practical difference. A man experiencing toxic loneliness spends his alone time scrolling through social media, watching other people live their lives, feeling sorry for himself, consuming but never creating. A Sigma male in strategic solitude spends that time reading books that expand his mind, building skills that increase his value, working on projects that move him toward his goals, training his body, sharpening his strategy. Same amount of alone time, completely different outcomes. Here's your test. Ask yourself this question right now. When you're alone, do you feel like you're hiding from the world or preparing for it? If you're hiding, that's toxic loneliness, and you need to shift your mindset. If you're preparing, that's strategic solitude, and you're already on the Sigma path. The Sigma male doesn't avoid people because he's afraid of them. He chooses solitude because he knows his time is valuable, and most social interactions are energy drains that don't contribute to his mission. He's not running away from connection. He's running toward something greater. 5. How childhood wounds became Sigma strengths. Every wound you received as a child became a weapon you wield as a man. This isn't motivational nonsense. This is documented psychology. What doesn't kill you doesn't just make you stronger. It literally rewires your brain in ways that create competitive advantages. Let's break down the specific wounds and how they transformed. Wound number 1, rejection by peer groups. This hurt deeply, didn't it? Not being chosen for teams, not being invited to parties, not fitting into the social hierarchy. But here's what it gave you: immunity to social pressure. While other men are still desperately trying to fit in, changing their opinions to match the crowd, you genuinely don't care what people think. You've already been rejected by everyone who matters, so what's one more person's disapproval? This makes you unfireable, uncancelable, and unconquerable. Wound number 2, lack of emotional support. Maybe your parents were absent, physically or emotionally. Maybe you had to figure out your problems alone. This created self-reliance so deep that you now see most people's neediness as weakness. When other men are having emotional breakdowns over minor setbacks, you're calmly solving problems because you've been solving your own problems since you were a child. Wound number 3, being misunderstood. Remember how nobody seemed to get you? How your thoughts were too deep, your interests too different, your way of seeing the world too unusual. This gave you intellectual independence. You don't need validation for your ideas because you've learned to trust your own judgment. While others are waiting for permission to think differently, you're already 10 steps ahead. Here's a practical example from the business world. Studies show that many successful entrepreneurs experience childhood adversity, divorce, poverty, bullying, illness. Why? Because those experiences force them to develop resilience, resourcefulness, and independent thinking. They couldn't rely on inherited advantages or social networks, so they built their own path. That's Sigma energy in action. Your wounds weren't weaknesses, they were training. Every moment of pain was preparing you for a life where you don't need anyone's approval, support, or understanding to achieve what you're meant to achieve. 6. The awakening of the self-reliant warrior. And now we arrive at the most profound transformation of all, the moment when the lonely child becomes the awakened Sigma male. This isn't a single moment of enlightenment where everything suddenly makes sense. This is a gradual, sometimes painful, always powerful evolution that usually unfolds over years. It's the journey from confusion to clarity, from pain to purpose, from isolation to intentional solitude. The awakening happens in 4 distinct stages, and each one builds upon the last. Miss one stage, and you're not fully awakened, you're just aware. And awareness without integration is just intellectual knowledge that doesn't translate into real power. Stage 1 is recognition. This usually hits you in your mid-20s, though for some it comes earlier, for others later. You're going about your life when suddenly you start noticing patterns. You see your friends having complete meltdowns because a relationship ended. You watch colleagues spiral into depression because they got passed over for a promotion. You observe men falling apart because their social media post didn't get enough likes, and something clicks inside you. A quiet voice says, "I don't break like that. Why don't I break like that?" That's when you start connecting the dots. Those years of eating lunch alone in school taught you that your value isn't determined by who sits with you. Those nights you spent by yourself, while other kids were at parties, trained you to generate your own happiness internally. Those moments when you had to solve your own problems because no one was there to help built a resilience that most men never develop. Here's a practical example. Two men get laid off from their jobs on the same day. The first man, who's always been socially dependent, immediately falls into crisis. He needs constant reassurance, calling everyone he knows, posting about his struggles online, seeking sympathy. 3 months later, he's still depressed, still stuck, still waiting for someone to save him. The Sigma male? He feels the initial shock. He's human after all. But within 48 hours, he's already strategizing. He's not calling people to complain. He's networking strategically. He's not posting about his problems. He's quietly researching opportunities. 6 months later, he's in a better position than before because he used the setback as a setup for a comeback. The recognition stage is when you realize that your different childhood wasn't a disadvantage. It was advanced training that most men never receive. Every rejection that once felt like a curse now looks like a lesson. Every moment of isolation that once felt like punishment now appears as preparation. Stage 2 is acceptance, and this is the harder stage. Not everyone makes it through. Recognition is intellectual. You understand what happened. Acceptance is emotional. You make peace with it. For years, maybe even decades, you carried resentment about your childhood. You looked at kids who had tight friend groups and felt envious. You saw families where parents were emotionally available and felt cheated. That resentment was poison, slowly eating away at your potential. Acceptance is when you finally let that poison go. It's when you stop saying, "I wish my childhood had been different," and start saying, "My childhood was exactly what I needed." This isn't toxic positivity. This is warrior wisdom. The understanding that the universe doesn't make mistakes with men who are meant for greatness. Every single man you admire has a story of adversity. Elon Musk was bullied so severely as a child in South Africa that he was hospitalized. Keanu Reeves dealt with dyslexia, absent parents, and devastating loss. Steve Jobs was abandoned by his biological parents. These men didn't succeed despite their painful childhoods. They succeeded because of them. Think about a sword being made. The blacksmith heats the metal until it's glowing red, hammers it repeatedly, then plunges it into cold water. To an observer who doesn't understand the process, it looks like torture. But the blacksmith knows that without that heat, without those hammer strikes, without that shocking cold water, the blade will never be strong enough to hold an edge. Your childhood was that forge. You were that blade, and now you're sharp enough to cut through any obstacle. Here's how you know you've reached acceptance. You no longer feel the need to explain or justify your personality to anyone. Someone says, "Why are you so quiet?" You don't feel defensive. Someone says, "Why don't you hang out more?" You don't feel guilty. You've accepted that this is who you are and it's not a flaw. It's your design. Stage 3 is integration, and this is where the real transformation happens. Integration is where you consciously choose to maintain and develop the strengths that your childhood created, while also being intentional about not letting old wounds dictate your present choices. Integration means you keep the strategic solitude that serves you while being open to meaningful connections when they genuinely add value to your life. You maintain your emotional independence while also allowing yourself to be vulnerable with the rare few who've earned that trust. You protect your time and energy fiercely, but you're not doing it from a place of fear. You're doing it from a place of purpose. Here's what integrated Sigma behavior looks like. You're at your corporate job, and your co-workers are planning another happy hour. The old you might have said no out of fear or resentment, but the integrated Sigma male makes a strategic decision. If it's the CEO's retirement party that could provide valuable networking, he goes, not for social approval, but as a strategic move. If it's just another random Thursday where people will gossip and waste time, he politely declines without guilt. Or consider relationships. The unintegrated Sigma male might avoid them entirely out of fear, but the integrated Sigma male understands that strategic connection isn't weakness, it's wisdom. He's just incredibly selective. He doesn't give his time to anyone who asks. He reserves it for people who match his depth, his values, his vision. Integration means you're using your childhood-forged skills intentionally, not reactively. You're alone when alone serves you. You're connected when connection serves your purpose. You're no longer controlled by past pain, but you're also not abandoning the strengths that pain created. Stage 4 is embodiment, and this is the final transformation. Embodiment is when everything we've discussed isn't something you think about, it's something you are. It flows naturally, effortlessly, powerfully. The embodied Sigma male moves through the world with quiet, unshakable presence. In conflict, he doesn't need to win arguments. He states his position once, clearly and calmly, and then he's done. His peace isn't contingent on others agreeing with him. In success, he doesn't broadcast his achievements. While others are posting every minor win on social media, desperate for validation, he's quietly building his empire. He knows that real power doesn't need announcement. His results speak louder than words ever could. In failure, he doesn't collapse or seek sympathy. He processes the setback privately, extracts the lesson, and implements the adjustment. Failure doesn't define him because his identity isn't tied to external outcomes. It's rooted in his internal character. In relationships, he brings his whole self without neediness. He can love deeply without losing himself. He can commit fully without compromising his mission. This is the paradox of the embodied Sigma. He's completely available yet completely free, fully engaged yet fully autonomous. The embodied Sigma male has daily practices that keep him aligned. He starts his morning in silence, not checking his phone, but connecting with his own thoughts. He guards his time like the precious resource it is, saying no to 90% of requests, because he knows that saying yes to everything means saying no to what truly matters. He invests in himself relentlessly, reading, learning, training, building. And here's where it all comes together. Ultimate freedom. The self-reliant warrior is the freest man alive. He's not free because he has money, though he probably does. He's not free because he has no responsibilities. He has many, but they're chosen, not imposed. He's free because he's escaped the prison that holds most men captive. The desperate need for external approval. Think about the average man's life. He can't change jobs because his identity is tied to his title. He can't leave a toxic relationship because he's afraid of being alone. He can't pursue his dreams because people might judge him. He's not living his life. He's performing a role in everyone else's story. The awakened Sigma male? He's writing his own story. He can walk away from anything that doesn't serve his purpose. He can reinvent himself at any age because he's not imprisoned by others' expectations. He can stand alone against popular opinion because he learned in childhood that being right matters more than being liked. This is the warrior mentality. Not aggressive, not violent, but absolutely uncompromising when it comes to his values and his vision. Real power isn't loud. It's the ability to control yourself, your emotions, your reactions, your trajectory. It's the power to maintain your peace in chaos, your clarity in confusion, your purpose in uncertainty. Your childhood gave you this power. Every time you had to self-soothe instead of seeking comfort, you were building emotional regulation. Every time you figured out a problem alone, you were building self-efficacy. Every time you created your own meaning, you were building independent thinking. These aren't just skills, they're superpowers. And now, as an awakened Sigma male, you have a responsibility. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to use these powers wisely. You've been given a gift that most men never receive, the gift of true independence. The question is, what will you build with it? The lonely child who felt different, who didn't fit in, who had to stand alone. That child wasn't broken. That child was being prepared for leadership that doesn't need a title, for strength that doesn't need validation, for purpose that doesn't need permission, for a life that doesn't follow the script everyone else is reading. You're not lonely anymore. You're liberated. You're not isolated anymore. You're independent. You're not weak anymore. You're the self-reliant warrior that the world desperately needs, but rarely produces. This is your awakening. This is your transformation. This is who you were always meant to become. So here's the truth that ties everything together. Your childhood loneliness wasn't random suffering. It was strategic preparation. While others were learning dependency, you were mastering independence. While they were seeking external validation, you were building internal strength. While they were following the crowd, you were discovering who you truly are. The Sigma male isn't created in comfort. He's awakened in isolation. And now you understand why you are the way you are. That child who sat alone, who felt different, who didn't fit in. He wasn't broken. He was becoming bulletproof. Every moment of solitude was a lesson. Every instance of being misunderstood was building your resilience. Every time you had to face yourself in silence, you were developing the most powerful skill a man can have: self-reliance. Remember this: average men fear loneliness because they don't know themselves. Sigma males embrace it because it's where we find our power. If this content resonated with you, if you felt this in your core, then you need to subscribe to this channel immediately. We're not here for entertainment, we're here for transformation. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the ranks of men who refuse to live by anyone else's rules. This is your tribe, this is your calling, and this is just the beginning. Welcome to the awakening.